Hey, Ryan.
Hey, how's everybody?
Good. How are you?
Thumbs up, man. Hold on, let me double check. We've got the audio coming. The output is in my ears, and no, this is wrong.
Okay. Do I sound
yeah,
better?
there you go. Much better.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
Much more
Velvety.
live theory-esque.
That's right. There was I spoke to a listener not terribly long ago, and I did it with the with the AirPods was the microphone, and he was just like, "Do you normally talk through that microphone?" And I said, "No, I just had to." And he had like I don't know, I felt like I ruined his estimation of me by speaking into the wrong piece of equipment. So anyway, I'm glad to have avoided such a sin a second time.
Sometimes we record and one of us is quieter, so it sounds like we're not as kind of intelligent or like in the discussion. Yeah, like not up to par.
That is really funny. Yeah, no, that's a good point. The lower audio person is the idiot. It doesn't matter what they're saying. It doesn't matter what they're saying. It's the sound of it. I mean that kind of technological legibility. I don't think that people on the other side. I don't think that they're not forced to think about that. But that's absolutely a thing.
They don't know what the persecution that we podcasters have been through. First, they came for Joe Rogan, and I said nothing.
That was really funny. But before we go forward, wait, who's Michael? Or is Michael the one who is and so on? Hey, how you doing? I've been corresponding with Michael. It's late for you. I appreciate you doing this.
No worries. And it's cold. You can tell.
What's the temperature? Obviously, you're gonna do it in communist Celsius.
15 degrees, Ryan.
Wow. Okay.
Apparently that's not cold.
It's not cold. It's 60 degrees.
It's 60? Oh, yeah, but he's in Australia. Come on.
Yeah.
He's in Perth, right?
Thank you.
It's all relative. When I lived in I'm not in California right now, but being out there for 3 years, I'm with you. When it got to 55, like it sometimes gets to like 55, and it feels very, very cold. And when I was a grad student at University of Vermont, I walked to campus one day and it was -19. But because I had been in California for 3 straight years, that felt as cold to me. Like the 55 felt as cold to me as the -19 did. It's all based on what you're used to. Yeah, I guess I would say.
Guys, can you go to the top of the document?
We have a document.
Oh yeah, we got a document, mate. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah, we have it's for gotcha questions.
Yeah.
Oh,
and personal grievances.
That would stress me so much if we had to do like a real gotcha episode.
Well, it's like what is it? Like I write about this in the Seriality book. Is like I think I've said this on the show before. Gotcha is as much memory as social media will allow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is just that has now just been in that's just in culture more generally, is that it's like to call I find this really interesting too, is that there is a difference between hypocrisy and like existential contradiction, but because of this other thing, the gotcha thing, those two get kind of collapsed to be the same thing, where it's like, well, 2 years ago you said this thing and now you're saying this other thing, and it's like, to be a hypocrite is like, I think the hypocrite is aware of it. It's an unconscious choice.
Yeah.
Contradiction is something else. That's just like you like again. But my favorite example, because I think it's the one that everyone can understand in a way. Like your worst quality being your best quality, and your best quality being your worst quality. Like you cannot. It's not escapable. That's not you being wait. Yesterday you were really nice, but for the same reasons today you're a dick. That's not you being a hypocrite. That's this like existential contradiction that is just like riven through you. Like anyway, so
that's really nice.
Maybe we should start just briefly, hello. We're Žižek So On, and today we're speaking with Ryan Engley. Hello,
Hey.
Ryan.
Hey.
Nice to have you on.
Nice to be here.
We're all longtime listeners of your podcast, so this is this is like a meeting
the true star of Y Theory.
Oh, I do. It is kind of funny that I said this to Todd one time that it's a little funny. Like, he only books that he's written after we met, which I don't think is a coincidence. And the first one the first most recent one that he likes is the book that I am the first quotation in it. It's in the comedy book. And then his most recent book is dedicated to me, which is
that's very
nice.
nice.
It is nice. Which is the racist fantasy book, and I'm glad that he hasn't, at least so far, been canceled over it, because that's the one dedicated to me. And I would feel like I don't know if this is a thing. I don't know if secondhand cancellation is a thing, but I would feel that if that happened to him. So anyway,
in certain areas it is, but
yeah.
And
you blame it on you. This is all because of you, Ryan.
That's exactly right. See, that's the other side of it, is that then I would be the one who would be blamed. So
and you're glossing over how Todd mentioned you in the acknowledgements, but passing off all email correspondence to Ryan Engley if anybody had an issue.
Oh, that's right. That was in the
That's good.
that was in the Universality book.
Yeah.
That was in the, yes, that's right. Yeah, his very nice footnote to me. The idea there's a particular it's a funny word choice by me. There's a particular understanding of the universal that he employs that he says is so indebted to me that all objectionable emails should go to me instead. But I believe I think there's like a typo in there. It's a really nice example of the unconscious choice. I think he misspells my email. So it's like he was sort of, his unconscious was as he was consciously trying to undermine me, his unconscious saved me. So I kind of think that was one of the, I don't know, it's one of the greatest acts of love that he's ever shown me. So
I think that applies to Žižek's constant misspelling of Todd's name in all of Žižek's
books. Wait, I don't know that I don't know. Wait, how does he do it? I don't know.
Dude, he does
like MAC, like McGowan.
Oh,
like
you're right.
over and over and over.
He'll write like Todd with one D. Like, he just like messes up his name.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right. He does do that. See, that's love. Yeah. Michael, that's love. I think you misspell someone's name repeatedly. That's love.
Just like a minor act of disrespect or something. We were just on a previous episode talking about In Defense of Lost Causes. Was that the one?
Yeah.
Where in the dedication it's to Alambidia, and it's when Žižek and him were at a conference, and Vidia's phone rings, and instead of turning it off or going in a different room, he asks Žižek to keep his voice down while he's talking to someone.
Okay.
and Žižek said, that's not the truest mark of friendship. He doesn't know what it is.
There we go. Yes. Total rubber stamp endorsement on that. Completely agree. Completely.
We actually usually kind of start with like how you came across Žižek and like how his work kind of figures in your own.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Well, yeah, I can totally do that. So I was an undergraduate at it was called Bridgewater State College at the time, but now it's called Bridgewater State University. On a technicality, I believe I had it explained to me that there were a number of schools in Massachusetts, in the U.S. that wanted to be a part of the University of Massachusetts system, and UMass did not want that. And what they discovered was that they could call themselves a university despite not technically being one, because it was all like a college is supposed to be a place that you can't get an advanced degree at, like a master's or a PhD.
Because Americans talk about college all the time, and like as a Canadian, it's a little funny because everywhere people go to universities here, that's what they call them. So it always was a bit of a confusion for me.
So there
Ryan's telling us he went to community college.
I did. I dropped out because that was when I got in the car accident. Halfway through the first year, I did go to community college, and dropped out for medical reasons, I suppose. But yeah, anyway, so I was there at the fake state college, and writing my master's thesis on Shakespeare, and I don't quite know. Oh yeah, this is how I got here. I don't know how this came up, but somehow I stumbled on Looking Awry, and the reason is because in the beginning of that, in the introduction, I think I was just searching for I was just doing an exhaustive search of because to do something on Shakespeare, it's one of these things that I sometimes really I groan about. Are any of you play video games? I have no idea. No, okay. So Metal Gear Solid 2 is a very famous video game and much discussed, especially online. There's a lot of videos about it. Part of the reason is because the game flips the protagonist into someone who no one cared about at all, and it was it was this this rupturous thing. A lot of people returned the game to GameStop the next day because they were so pissed that the protagonist changed and all. Anyway, so there's all kinds of studies about it, like engagement with it, a lot in popular media. And I one time heard somebody say isn't there no, how was it phrased? There can't be anything more to say about Metal Gear Solid 2. And I just, as someone who studied Shakespeare, it's dude, this is much older, much longer study. You it's not that the failure to say something about a work says nothing about the work. It's about the person who's saying something about the work. That was something that I had to understand, because it is overwhelming to study someone like Shakespeare and try to say something that no one has said before. Yeah. And so I was trawling through really anything anybody had ever written on Shakespeare, and particularly more recently, what was a more recent turn, because I had all these this formalist turn, that the Northrop Frye, this kind of thing. And I don't know how the library search found this, but Žižek has this line, and I'm forgetting what play he says, that it might be Richard II, where he says that it's proof that Shakespeare had to have read Lacan. Right. Yeah. You know that this great retro causality thing. And I had no idea. I had no idea who he was. I could not. I thought his name was a joke. I was like, Slavoj Zizek. It made no sense to me. And I brought it to my advisor, who was like, I don't think you should really be citing this. what he said to me. You shouldn't cite this guy. He's more of a, and then this didn't make any sense to me either, because he wrote this under email. He wrote he's more of a Lacan scholar, but I had never heard of Lacan either. So I was like, Lacan? I was like, I didn't know. I didn't know anything. But that was, but I read a little bit. I tried to read, and I saw that he'd written these things on Alien, which was a film I adore, and felt as I had started to come to a mature understanding of as an undergrad in a film class. And so that's where it started. And then when I went to UVM and to work with Todd, as it happened, that was when I went back and I had a basis for understanding. I was just about to call him Slavoj. I have no right to call him Slavoj because we're not friends. Todd and he are friends. The first book that I read was The Puppet and the Dwarf, and that was really it was just mind opening to me, just to think in a way. I you can see easily why contrarians are attracted to Žižek, and I don't think that he is a contrarian, but you can see it because what he rejects is normative and staid logic, and any kind of evaluation about any kind of cultural object or social formation that has become doxa. And he just had this way of just flipping on its head things that I thought I understood very well. I grew up Catholic. I thought I understood Christ and Christianity pretty well. And I was reading this book, and the way that he shows this this radicality to Christianity that is not a part of Christianity as practice, but is there in the text. This idea that a loving God means that it's a lacking God, and this is the first time that a lacking God has ever occupied the center of a dominant religion. That was, to wrap my head around, it took a lot. And so yeah, that's where I started. That's how I got hooked on Žižek.
So then you meet with Todd. Did you know Todd was a Žižek guy before going to UVM?
No, it was all a meet cute, all an accident.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I didn't know
How'd
who
you
he
meet
was.
Todd?
So how did I meet Todd? Yeah, so when you get, sometimes, this doesn't always happen, but in English departments, sometimes, decreasingly, English departments have funding to give to grad students, and you get to be a funded student, which means that you don't pay to go to college. You get paid a pittance to be a TA at a state university. I should say you get paid a pittance. There are some places that pay better, and when you were a TA, I was like terrified, because what that meant at UVM didn't mean I was assisting another teacher as that
a Todd assistant.
No, that would have been a lot easier for me. What it meant is you're teaching your own class. You're the solo instructor in the room. So I went from being an undergraduate, and it was a real confrontation with castration, because I went from being an undergraduate student to about I graduated mid-year, so about 6 months later, teaching undergraduate students and teaching in writing classes, because that's usually how it works. And I had never taken a writing class ever, right. because I like it usually happens if you really like literature, you tend to test out of those classes. It's just like one of those things. So I had never taken a writing class, and then I was expected to teach it. And I was terrified about all this stuff. So I was just trying to get as much information as possible. And I met with the director of graduate studies, who asked me about my interest. And I told her what they were. And, as I just mentioned, in undergrad, it was Shakespeare. But I was kind of moving away from that, because I did sort of, despite, I don't know that I said anything thoroughly original in my master's thesis. That's funny slip. In my undergraduate thesis, same thing about the master's thesis. But I just became kind of exhausted about Shakespeare and Renaissance studies and things like that. And it wasn't really what I cared about. It wasn't what I thought about when I wasn't doing school. It was more television. And so I mentioned this to the DGS, and she said, you should take a class with Todd McGowan. He just wrote something on disaster films. And I thought, oh, interesting. Because that film Anonymous, right, about Shakespeare not being Shakespeare. Yeah. Okay. That was coming out. So she kind of made that connection, and so I signed up for his theory class, his introduction to, I think it was Introduction to Literary and Cultural Theory. That was what the name of the class was. And it was so that's the class that's somewhat immortalized in his book on comedy, because Todd was telling a story on the first day of class, and this friend of mine, his name was Carl, like, he laughed at the story because he thought the way that Todd was telling it was funny, but he laughed before the punchline. And Todd was just like, you laugh before the punchline, like the punchline's about to, and I said, he premature ejaculated. And Todd thought that was so funny, he didn't even laugh. He just looked at me and he was like, that's incredible. He's like, you could use that. And I had no idea what he meant. You could use that. I was like, you use it. I was like, I don't know what
you use it.
He looked at you, he's like, let's start a podcast together.
We should do a podcast for 8 years or whatever it's for. 6 years. That's funny. Yeah. So anyway, it was taking that class with him, I was so I had some professors in undergrad who had acquainted me a little bit with Freud, and mostly I had become acquainted with psychoanalytic theory through queer theory. That was like my only, like, that was like kind of my anchor in that class. And I was I don't think it always works out this way. In fact, I'm sure that it doesn't. But in that class, I was kind of the only person who was really interested in psychoanalysis. So I ended up talking with Todd a lot. And there were some I made some like baby step connections between things that I was reading in the class and outside of the class. Things I think this is the thing that is like the thing I said before our show, the thing that your best quality being your worst quality and your worst quality being your best quality. I think that one of the best qualities about Žižek is that when you read him, it is so generative that you start making, once you understand something, you start making you understand connections to all kinds of things.
Mhm.
The problem is that like often this is where I ran up against this, is that like you make the connection but you don't know why it works, and I think you have to do that. Like I think that has to be the thing. Like so I was making these connections to Community, the NBC series, and I know that we recently on the podcast talked about Bottle Episode. That was not anything that I didn't come to until much later, but it was I think I wrote this thing that I presented at the Northeast MLA conference about I think it was I did something on the like the visual gaze and the documentary episode in the second season. And so I was making these connections, but again, like they worked, and I haven't looked at the paper. I mean, I wrote it so long ago. I haven't looked at the paper as like 10 years ago now, but I'm sure that all the things would still stand up, but I had no idea why it worked. And so that took me much longer to understand. And I think sometimes like Žižek inspires a rush to application when what he does is more complicated than that. But it's because it's so accessible that there is a rush to application after reading his work. But really, he's always so good at this, which is and this is the most important thing, is that like he doesn't just apply theory to objects or take objects to theory. He puts them in a dialectical relation where the object tells you something about the theory. And that just, it sounds simplistically put, but it is profound. Like to be able to root that out. So I wasn't there yet. I was at the application stage, which is like, I mean, as a grad student that you kind of should be. And I was like a first semester grad student. That's where you should be. And it took time and a lot of thinking and a lot of work to move toward like having a grasp of how everything worked enough to be able to see an object. So for me to see an object like the Bottle Episode and say, this is explicable through Hegel, and also it's in a way more Hegelian than Hegel is on some of these points. And so this actually explains how he works back to him in a way that like he couldn't have gotten to on his own, you know, like, so like those I'll call them theoretical moves. I was going to say gestures, but it's not strong enough. Those theoretical moves were things that, like, you know, I had to finish my master's to do and then get my PhD. And like it is real. It sounds stupid because, like, especially if you know, like especially if you grow up like working class like it can be hard to think of like knowledge work as real work, because there's nothing that happens to your hands at the end of the day. But like it is real work. And especially. You've listened to the show, so you know this, but just for people who don't, like, I mentioned the car accident that I was in 2007. Like, I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I'm sure all of you know this, and to be able to think after you know, being in a coma and being in the hospital for a month and outpatient rehab for, you know, 4 months, and, you know, and all the rehabilitation, like, just to be able to think, like, I promise you, maybe you don't feel thinking as work, anybody listening, but it is. It really, really is, especially to think something new, something you're not predisposed to thinking, something that is against your inclination, that is real work.
Absolutely. Definitely. That's like you said, one of the things that's great about Žižek is it kind of frees up at least an approach to thinking about things, and, you know, what if the exact opposite is true? Like
yeah, sure.
A non-intuitive way of engaging with theory and media, etc. But
absolutely.
Speaking of which, engaging with theory, we read, I think this is a recent essay, but correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, your essay called Psychoanalytic Seriality as Media Theory, From Freud's Couch to Yours.
Yes, that is a recent article that was published in Continental Thought and Theory, and a really excellent theory journal that is open source, run by, I believe, not an Australian.
Bunch of Kiwis.
What a slur. Yeah, that's right.
It's same thing, whatever.
No, I don't want to. I can't do that. Obviously, as Michael pointed out, it's a war. So it's warring factions. But yeah, so a great journal, Cindy Zier runs, and absolutely a shout out to her. She did a wonderful job with it, and Mike Grimshaw as well. Yes, I have published that. That was so I think it was a 2019, 2020 publication. I'm forgetting. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe it's even earlier than that. But that is as I've been writing my book, and I've broken up where that article places in the book. I think it's kind of crazy that I wrote it as one article, because there are three that I've kind of broken pieces of that into 3 separate chapters. So
it's a very serial approach there, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, to write a book is even though it ends up being a standalone product at the end of the day, it is a serial endeavor. So like, and I'll start by explaining seriality in these like really basic terms. When you write a text message to someone, I'll even like put it at that level. Okay, when you write a text message to someone, and let's say it's a slightly difficult text or something that you want to be careful about explaining, what is it that a lot of people do? They start writing it in the notes app on their phone, or they start writing it somewhere else first. And what happens when you start writing one of those messages is that you start creating rules for yourself. You don't want to keep saying the same word. You don't want to belay the point. You want to make sure to say something. You have to figure out, well, is this going to occasion more texts? Is this going what is the response that I want? And so you start going through all these things, which is like, who's the implied reader of this text? How do I want the person on the other side of this how do I want them to read this? How do I want them to feel? What do I want them to think? How do I want to come off? And you start doing all of these things that it's exactly the same thing as writing a book. Like you have to but you do that all the time for everything, from the sentence to the chapter layout to like how you're explaining yourself. So that's a little brief introduction into what would be a serial process in everyday life, which I think is really important. So seriality is one of these things that begins with the material. It's not even a terribly old idea. The word is I think it's first coined in like 1823, and it has to do with, it started to be used as a word to describe like arrangement of teeth in a biological organism or something like that. So it came from biology, and that's like, we don't really, I'm sure that word is still used in biology today, but like that's a real specialist case, because like 10 or so years after that, after the word is invented for all practical purposes, or coined would probably be the better way to put it, there are productions in technological advancements in print production that enables serial novels, serial magazines, all this like incredible like proliferation of what we would start to call serial media that hadn't existed theretofore. And Dickens is it's not the case that novels had never been put out in installments before. I think Robinson Crusoe was put out in the 1700s in installments, but it had been written first. So what Dickens did is he writes the Pickwick. It's normally called the Pickwick Papers. It has a slightly longer title. He writes the Pickwick Papers in 1836, and it's the first text in English. And also, Honoré de Balzac does the same thing in France. They don't know anything of each other, but so something happened. Yeah, so in 1836, it's just the serials in the
same year.
Same year. Yeah, same year.
Cool. It's like calculus getting invented.
Exactly.
Dickens comes with Balzac.
Yes, he does. Very nice. Oh, Michael, you you grabbed the bag with that one. So, Dickens and Balzac, what they do, and then this would later be like shortly thereafter. This would happen in Russia with Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. And then in the U.S. With Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin, which would become, this is something that's in my book's introduction, that would be the second best-selling book in the whole of the 19th century, I think, in the U.S. And it only outsold by the Bible in the whole of the 19th century. So not only, what Dickens does, I sort of skipped over this, but it's important, is that he's writing the story as it's being put out. Okay, and that's like really, really crucial, because what it does, and this is why a lot of like part of the reason why people are drawn to the Victorian novel when talking about television, is does make a lot like specifically American television in older dispensations, where a show is it isn't so many weeks ahead. It's maybe like 6 weeks ahead. And when you write that way, I mean, this is what happened to Dickens. When you write that way, something can happen. There can be this magic in this triangle that you have between author, text, and audience. And you have this thing where you didn't plan on something being good or important or even interesting, but it catches on. And so Pickwick Papers wasn't selling super well. This is like a well-known story. Jennifer Hayward does a good job of recounting this, and like she's an excellent scholar of the Victorian serial in a book called Consuming Pleasures, and wasn't selling super well. And then this Cockney character Sam Weller is introduced, and people love him. And so Dickens is like, "How about some more of that guy? Why don't we do a little bit more of that?" And this happens in TV, like, you know, like a pretty good example of that I always have at the top of my head is the character of Ben Linus on Lost was not written until Michael Emerson had a scene-stealing 3-episode stint on the series, and people liked him. He was supposed to die, like he was just supposed to be like a nothing character, but people liked him so much that, like, not only did he become a pivotal character on the show, but it launched his like career a little bit.
You definitely had the sensation they were making that one up as they went along.
Yes, that is true. Well, yeah, because like the part of it is like that's the thing that like it's really because of Lost and I would say Sopranos too, and just this era of TV that people even write the end or like before they do any like that was just not like there's a great story. There's a great story in the I guess in the 60s, my dad told me this. I believe it was The Fugitive, the television series, and the show. Like the guy who was I'm forgetting his name. The guy who was the showrunner. He just came to the writers' room beginning of one season, and he says to everybody, he's like, "Okay, we got to start thinking about how we're going to wrap this up, how we're going to end this." And everyone laughed at him. It was like, "You don't end the show. You get canceled."
Right.
Like, and that's true. Like far more shows have been canceled than have ever had an ending. You know, and this is still the case. But this whole thing, this is sort of my point. This whole thing has been around for about 120 years, which really isn't that long. It's like it's a little bit older than film. You know, film, which 1895, which the incredible coincidence of film and psychoanalysis becoming you would say not, maybe you wouldn't want to use the word invented, but like being like announced like to the masses during the same year, and with the publication of Studies in Hysteria, and then the Lumiere brothers and everything. It's not. People always think it's the train arriving at Ciutat Station, but that's actually not the first thing. I'm forgetting what it is right now off the top of my head in 1895. But anyway, when there is a new kind of media, just to go back to some of the earlier stuff we were talking about, when a new kind of media happens, it also carries with it a new way of thinking. And this is my claim, and this is kind of where I get into my area. Is there's a lot of really wonderful writing about serial narrative and serial television and even stuff like non-narrative seriality, like Wikipedia updates, and I imagine somebody's working on something about the seriality of like iOS updates and things of that nature, which is also one of those things where like, is that non-narrative? Because like literally the update itself, there's always the whenever Apple puts out a new thing, there's just they change the font or they change where the clock is, and then there's suddenly there's all these memes or whatever. So it's is there a narrative gets generated from that in the same way that ping pong balls come out of a machine and we generate narratives about the NBA draft. So is it really non-narrative anyway? So my interest is here, where that there is we have a psychical attachment to media, and that there is something about the materiality of the serial that I think overlays the word might be a homology. There is a homology to the way that our psyches work. So our psyches have always been serial, but until its material invention, that can't be understood. And so that's something that's really interesting. As you know, as I write in that article, Freud is in 1895 in Studies on Hysteria in the text announcing the psychoanalytic method. It starts to talk about one of the issues with the treatment, like in a structural sense, which is just that they have to end, and they have to and he can't really come up with a way to make the ending of a single session meaningful, like it's left to the clock when the clock strikes twinge, like you got to go. And that to him, as he writes, is like when everyone sits down to read their favorite serial story, and a shot has rung out or a heroine has made a decisive speech, and you come upon the words "to be continued." Yeah. And so, like, it's a kind of a dumb thing to say in one sense, but like he can't write that if the serial doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's like sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, it's like the session is over for George Costanza when the zipper becomes unstuck from his jacket.
So that's better than right. So that is more like Lacan. That is more like the punctuated session, because what Lacan is trying to avoid is this exact problem of that Freud uncovers, which is that like you make the clock be the meaning making signifier to a session, and that impedes like anything.
Well, it's funny because George, like, his anger over his stuck zipper is exactly what's wrong with him.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's exactly. Well, that's why. Like, so I mean, I have that line. I'm being a little glib, but I do think this is true. Because I do. I mean, you're right to quote from Seinfeld, because I quote from Seinfeld in the article. Yeah. Because Jerry has this pre-show bit about, don't you hate seeing To Be Continued? And I hated this as a child. I think I've said this before, but on other things. So I apologize for repeating myself. But my mother, after I started writing about all this, she said to me, she said, you always hated To Be Continued as a kid. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, when the show would end and it would say To Be Continued, or you would just say like, oh, it's a continue. Like that's what I would call it. A continue.
A continue, nice.
And that's what Jerry talks about in one of the pre-show bits. I think it's the episode is called The Wallet.
The Wallet,
where his father loses his wallet. My wallet's gone. Right?
Yeah.
Check my wallet. It's horrible when you sense the to be continued coming. You're watching the show, you're into the story, then there's like 5 minutes left, and suddenly you realize, hey, they can't make it. Timmy's still stuck in the cave. There's no way they wrap this up in 5 minutes. I mean, the whole reason you watch a TV show is because it ends. If I wanted a long, boring story with no point to it, I have my life. A comedian can't do that. See, I can't go, man walks into a bar with a pig under his arm. Can you come back next week?
Yeah.
What's the deal? To be continued.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, am I not just doing that?
Was that the episode, Pete, that was a double that you were talking about?
Yeah, you didn't mention it in the article, but the episode itself is a double episode.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, you know what? I think that there sometimes there are things that are interesting to me that to go back to the text message thing. I think. Does that help the argument that I'm making, or is this just like I'm trying to?
Ryan, it would have brought everything together. It would have been a brilliant point. I recently found an interview with Larry David, Charlie Rose, with the black background, and they're speaking very candidly. And he described it. I'd never. I mean, it's obvious when you think of Seinfeld this way, but he said that Seinfeld was pitched not as a show about nothing, but as a show about how a comedian comes up with material. Yeah, and that like throws like when I was a kid, obviously because I started watching it as like when I was quite young, I never really like paired up the stand-up bits with the show. Yeah, but I mean it does work that way, especially in the earlier seasons. And it's funny because like in that episode on The Wallet, he's saying, "Don't you hate To Be Continued?" And then of course the show is To Be Continued.
It's going to be a To Be Continued. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. He's doing that. Yeah, so what you call that in TV terms is you call hanging a lampshade, or putting a lampshade on it, where you say what you're doing as you're doing it.
Okay.
And which I find very psychoanalytic. And a lot of times it's used as a device to like it's sometimes in I will say this in less adroit hands, it's used as a like as an excuse to do something cliched. But in like like in a cooperative calligraphy, the episode of Community that is self-aware as a bottle episode. Abed keeps saying it. Like it really, like that episode, it really tells you about what the bottle episode does. And not like didactically, not in exposition, but in just like in what it does in the whole architecture of it, and even in shot. I mean, this is in my my very recent article. In fact, so recent I'm not sure it's out yet. But it'll be in my book. And I think that like with Seinfeld doing that, like I don't know. I have become interested in trying to track down at archives like recordings of TV shows that like have the commercials, like it's in their original airing. And I don't know, like did people know that The Wallet was going to be a two-parter before it aired? You know, like I don't know that.
Yeah.
I would say probably not. So like so if it's in fact it would be more interesting if it's not. So let's just go with that. Let's just pretend that's true.
Yeah.
And if it's not, what we're about to say still works theoretically, but not actually. So what you do, because you don't think that there's going to be some structural resonance with that stand-up bit from Jerry's with the episode, because they don't know, because there's often like there's like a little bit, like the Marine Biologist is a pretty good example where
one of the best episodes.
It's one of the, I think it's for my money, I think it's the best. I think there are some others that are challengers, but I think it's the best. It's a great episode that like almost everything comes back, and what is so successful about it is almost every object introduced into the episode is like Chekhov's gun, and then the thing that actually is Chekhov's gun seems like a MacGuffin, which is like what happens. Like it's just from the beginning of the episode, and I'll get back on track on the other thing in a second. But like Jerry starts with Golden Boy. He starts with his shirt.
Like, Elaine, look at Golden Boy.
Look at Golden Boy. It's always the first shirt I wear when I get back from sending the laundry out. And she's on the phone. And she's on the phone with Pendant Publishing, and they're gonna they are gonna put her on to talk to Yuri Testikov. What Jerry tells her is that, like, I heard this amazing thing about Tolstoy. He really originally wanted to call War and Peace. War, what is it good for? Now Tolstoy, another serial author, so we have a nice little connection here. And of course that comes back, and but it's even little things like in that scene, George breaks in, and he breaks in doing a Jack Nicholson impression from A Few Good Men. He breaks in going, "You can't handle the truth," and his little part of the episode is he's explaining that he has to take his mail when he leaves the house because his mother reads it, and there's an alumni magazine, and Elaine starts reading from the alumni magazine. Both Jerry and George went to Queens College, and there's an entry about Jerry, and she reads the entry about Jerry, and that he had done a pilot for NBC, which was not picked up. And then Elaine says, "George, how come there's nothing about you in here?" And Jerry says, "He can't handle the truth." So even so everything really comes back in that episode, except for the thing, they do a really nice thing where, because of the way that it's structured, Kramer goes out to the beach and he hits the golf balls, right? He's the only one that does it. And he becomes obsessed with the sand. So you think his storyline is about the sand when really it's about the golf ball. And so like that's the like and the episode does like really great jobs of like hiding that from you, because and Kramer normally doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the crew because he's usually off doing his other things against you, which, to go back to The Wallet, is probably what that beginning bit that Jerry does also accomplished, which was that like he's telling you that you're about to watch a to be continued episode and you don't know that. And so that is this, which is the same experience that Freud is trying to, like, he's trying to understand and get out of analysis, which is that you don't know you're about to do it to be continued, but you are. And this is like really vexing to him.
Why are you telling me that it's going to be a continued when it's going to be a to be continued?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And nicely done.
So whereas like early cinema would signify that at the end, where you'd have the title card, the end.
Yes. And to bring in early cinema is really interesting, is that like a lot of early cinema, like film serials were dominant in early cinema. And when particularly when synchronous sound came, But even earlier than that, like with the development of the feature, the feature film, like we totally take this for granted. Why is something a feature film? Well, because it's not the serial short beforehand, you know. And there's other things that we totally take for granted. Like people used to just like walk into the theater, just, because they would just be running. And it's not until Psycho. There was a little bit earlier, like 20 years earlier, there was this thing where when Mildred Pierce was released, there was a thing that you couldn't sit for the last 5 minutes of the movie. They didn't want people doing that because it would like ruin the film for the next people who saw it or whatever. And it's not until Hitchcock and Psycho, like there's this huge ad campaign where it's like Hitchcock pointing at a watch or like a clock, like be there on time. Like that wasn't a thing, you know. So anyway, in this earlier era of cinema, serial film is like functioned not unlike TikTok. It were these things that like you saw bits and pieces of, and that's what you did. Like that was your kind of relationship to the movie theater.
It's like the comic strip in a newspaper, right? Where you only get this this couple of panels, and then
that's it. Like that's the whole reason why I look at the Sunday paper. My mother-in-law always gets a Sunday paper, and it's a big spread. And I always read the Sunday, and I'm always confused because I don't read the funnies during the rest of the week. I just read it on Sunday, which is like, again, this experience, like if you're just walking into the theater and you're seeing like every 4 minutes of The Perils of Pauline, you like, it's not so confusing. Like you don't have to see everything to get what's going on. Pauline's going to be in peril. I mean, it's right there in the title. But like that was the relationship to the cinema then. And then again, with the development of the feature, the serial falls out of film really until the film series, like Star Wars and Star Trek. That whole thing starts to happen. And then obviously we're here where the film series is dominant. But yeah, I thought sorry there was a question. I want to go back to a question. Someone had a question.
I don't know what question you were answering just now, but I was going to ask you earlier. You were talking about Freud and seriality. In the essay, you're kind of drawing a distinction between his and Lacan's sort of interpretation of seriality. And the distinction there in the analytic session is really interesting in terms of seriality. If you could expand on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So so two things. So Lacan does, I would argue, I mean, is it an argument or is it just an observation? I just think he does this, but maybe it is an argument that he is trying to solve this problem of seriality that Freud lays out. That because what Freud says, I mean, I read this in the article, but for anyone who hasn't read it, what Freud gets into is that like it's really the to be continued. It's the fall of that cut that causes the problem. It has nothing to do with what anyone is saying. That's this like really great formalist point that Freud is making. It has nothing to do with the content that Eisen is saying. Absolutely nothing. Like it's not that like, well, someone like they're going to start telling this traumatic story, and then they got to go, and then of course that would bother them until the next time they came to see Freud. He doesn't say that at all. What he says is it's just the falling of that end. And it doesn't matter what anyone was talking about. He says it lingers more in the mind than it otherwise would have. And that the patient suffers more than if they had just finished the story. And it's the same. And it's like, he's talking about, he doesn't name it as the cliffhanger, but because I don't know if that had been like, I doubt that's an English expression. It's sourced from Thomas Hardy, who in A Pair of Blue Eyes, this serial novel that he wrote, he literally has the main character hanging off a cliff between one installment and the next.
As an aside, Ryan, do you know the end of the original Italian Job?
Oh, I do, of course.
Michael Caine.
Yeah. Of course.
Another literal cliffhanger.
Yeah, absolutely. No, literal cliffhangers are great. I like in the Thomas Hardy one. It's kind of cool. Like the person hanging off a cliff is a geologist, and he's looking at the rock, and he's like he's thinking about like how long the rocks have been there, and like at the same time as he's contemplating his own like seemingly immediate finitude, and he's looking about like how the rocks are going to stay there, and he's not going to. It's very cool, and it's either he invents it or we just say he invents. It's like one of those things. So Freud is talking about what he's talking about is a cliffhanger, and the thing about the cliffhanger and this is just in the Thomas Hardy example, but not in the Italian Job because that ends the film. But in the Thomas Hardy thing, the woman he was with, she takes off all her clothes and fashioned them into a rope to pull him up. And so it's just like, oh, so if you had just been able to read,
stress Maxima.
it's pretty good. I like that. I like that a lot. So like that's often how it happens is that like you when something is a cliffhanger, like I think True Blood might be the most egregious offender of this, like for a show that I've watched and like that, like every episode is this cliffhanger, but you watch like 40 seconds of the next episode and whatever tension was there is just immediately resolved. And that is sort of that is Freud's not referencing the cliffhanger, but he is talking like really like expertly about the structures that if you could have just continued the session for like another couple of minutes, probably the thing would have wrapped up and it would have been fine. But the thing is you can't do that. Like you have to end it because every ending is going to occasion that. That's sort of what he's positing.
Is there something good about the anticipation for the next session?
I don't. He doesn't.
Not,
okay. He doesn't find it that way. I mean, I can only answer for him. Like he doesn't think. He thinks that is just it troubles the mind of the patient.
Okay.
I don't.
Do you think Ryan that
yeah.
the sort of artificial limitations of the clinic, like that end, that it generates this sense that they're on the cusp of some kind of breakthrough?
That's interesting, Michael. Yeah,
in the same way that in the same way that in the rebus of a dream, there's this sense there's some kind of depth to the dream to be interpreted, but it's the limitation of the particular dream itself that produces this sense of depth.
I like it. So I'm always wary I'm always very aware of my role as a media studies professor, and I try not to make bold proclamations about the clinical side of things because some people, analysts, for good reason, just sometimes don't like that or find it comes from a place of lack of experience. But
the good news is here we're so bereft of any credibility that you can say whatever you want.
How could they not fire you?
I never thought I'd fail at failing.
Oh, come on, man.
I feel like I can't do anything wrong.
Nonsense. You do everything wrong.
Everything?
Everything.
You really think so?
Absolutely. I have no confidence in you.
All right. I guess I just have to pick myself up, dust myself off, and throw myself right back down again.
That's the spirit. You suck.
I know.
Yeah.
That is really, really funny.
And
that is
a damn shame if it doesn't work out in practice because we're talking theory here.
I suppose I definitely see the liberatory point that you're making. So what I'll say is I think, Michael, to your question, I think that it absolutely can function that way. That like I felt like we were really getting somewhere. And what I would say Freud's point probably would have been, if confronted with that question, would be that is exactly the kind of conclusion that he would like to push the patient away from. That like, because I think it is, as you said, it's just because of if that is how someone would have felt, it's just because of the end coming that they felt. That has nothing to do. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. There's to add another Seinfeld reference in here. George's relationship ends in what he feels to be a premature way, and he's like, "I loved it, Jerry," and Jerry's like, "No, you didn't." And he's like, "She could have been the one." No, couldn't have been. But George just thinks because the relationship ends, then it was the most important thing in the world. But
right.
But Jerry just sees right through it.
Right. No, it is and so that like that's why he and I think Lacan in their different ways, like they try to work out the end of analysis as like what do you and Freud actually has this is a spoiler for my book, but like Freud has a pretty good answer for this in Studies on Hysteria. Like it's like one of the last lines. And I don't know why he doesn't come back to it. Maybe he just thinks that because he wrote that and he had less experience then when he wrote that line, that when he had more experience he couldn't go back to a prior conclusion. I'm not sure, but the conclusion he comes to is that like what you want to bring the neurotic, you want to bring whoever is in analysis to be better prepared to accept ordinary human unhappiness. That's the like amazing phrase.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's the like that. I just think it's a great answer. I just think it's a great like what's the end of analysis is like when someone can accept ordinary human unhappiness. I think it's a perfect answer. But I think that, you know, for different reasons, like you can't. I don't think I would want to. If I was an analyst, I don't think I would want to say like on the first day, like, look, we're going to try to get you to accept ordinary human unhappiness. That seems like it's not enough. And I would, and it doesn't seem like a good advert for the method itself. So, but I think that like what he rightly intuited as the issue, like right from the very beginning, and then explored is that like you do have to come upon it as a project. And I would say like as a series, like when you open yourself up to analysis, when you decide to make yourself vulnerable in that way, you do commit to a series. And whether you've thought about it or not, and I think that, and it's a series of cliffhangers. It's a series where, you know, some episodes are better than others. You know, where maybe they should have held back that one. It's a series where maybe it gets canceled, or you would want it to be like, and you don't, you know. So like I think he's just trying to puzzle that out. And Lacan, for his part, so what he tries to do to kind of get around this issue of the end, because what he doesn't want, and this is what gets him kicked out of the I always like to think it's funny now that it's the IPA, because it's the International Psychoanalytic or Psychoanalysis Association, and it's just a lot funnier to think of it as India Pale Ale. Like it's just, so it gets him.
He just loved his hoppy brews.
He was so into putting pomegranate and grapefruit in as these notes, and they were like, that's ridiculous.
They were like, no, beer has to be undrinkable.
It has to be an undrinkable thing. Save that for a session, which we're going to pronounce in a very
a session IPA.
Yeah, exactly. So what he tries to avoid is that it's just that the clock is the meaning making signifier. So what he does is I prefer, because I think most places will call this the short session or the variable length session, and I think that like that's why he got kicked out, because people thought he was like he was taking advantage of people. He was like charging full price for like maybe they would sit down with him for like 8 minutes, and you can see the like the problem with that from an economic standpoint, certainly, and like but the point is, this is the better way to think of it, is it's a punctuated session. And what that means is like he was waiting for the patient to say something that exceeded them. And the second that happened, that's it. That's over. You got to go.
Yeah.
And I like it as a solution. The only issue, I mean, this is like a thing that like one has to grapple with Lacan, is that like it does install him as the of his domain, to go back to Seinfeld. It does it does make him the like he's the meaning making signifier. So like I've decided when you exceed yourself, that would be so. But I also think he's right, and it does take another person to note like you said something that was like you said more than what you meant, and I think. I think on the side of the principle of the thing, like he's really, really right. But it's just sort of like, it's a lot like the formulas and the mathemes that like, he said this was to hystericize his students to disinstall him as master. But excuse me, because he was the only one who understood them in the first place. Like that he becomes the math, you know what I mean? So like that's you get back to that, the best thing about you is the worst thing about you, worst thing about you, the best thing about you. Like, so I think that's he tries to untangle the knot of the ending, but like in making him the punctuator as like a 1960s Marvel villain.
Well, he's the guy with the hook pulling someone off stage, right?
Yeah, right.
Kill one.